We are live and recording. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Happy Wednesday. I'm so excited because we have two authors with us who are very well known and loved with our readers, and especially my fellow YA readers out there. Let us give a very, very warm welcome and round of applause to Mackenzi Lee and Stephanie Garber. And now I am super excited because many of you, our bookseller Victoria, Loki, where Mischief Lies was one of her staff picks, and she absolutely loved it. And I'm excited because Gamora and Nebula, which is book 2 in the Marvel Universe YA, Gamora and Nebula, Sisters in Arms. We need to say the full title. But it just came out yesterday, so a happy, only mildly belated book birthday. And we are so excited to get to celebrate book 2 in this series. And everyone, Gamora and Nebula, they go to a planet because, of course, Gamora is doing something and Nebula is following her as it happens. And both of them are trying to get the heart of this planet, going about it in very different manners. One finds some miners, the other one finds a religious sect, which, just opens up a lot of possibilities for plot and mischief and adventure and so many things to happen. That's all I'm going to tell you, though. No spoilers here. And before I go ahead and throw it over to Stephanie, just a tiny little bit of information. I know you guys already know about them, but Mackenzi holds a BA in history and an MFA in writing for children and young adults from Simmons College. And she is a New York Times bestselling author of the historical fantasy novels Loki, as I just said, as well as the Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue and the rest of the books in that series, which are also favorites amongst our readers. I listened to the audiobooks for Gentleman's Guide.
Oh, they're so good.
Oh, phenomenal. They're so good.
I don't know if I'm supposed to talk yet, but I am the biggest advocate for my own audiobooks.
Your audiobooks are amazing. Like the writing is phenomenal, and then like the narrator on top did such a great job. So I highly recommend them as well to everyone. And
Same.
Right. And then Stephanie is a New York Times and internationally best-selling author of the Caraval series, and her books are published in over 30 languages. And she also has a new book coming out this fall, which we've been getting to see teasers of as well. Oh, I found a white moment.
I got it.
It's so beautiful. Oh, you have a coveted item there, milady. But before I pass it off to Stephanie, house rules, everyone. To the right-hand side, we have our chat section. Say hello. I will be there in the chats also saying hello to everyone. And then if you look down below, I see we already have 2 questions, which is awesome. So if you have any questions, make sure that you click the Ask a Question button. And as that would imply, that's where you can submit your questions. And then you may be wondering, where can I get Loki book 1? Where can I purchase book 2? I already have all of the books, but I want other books by these amazing authors. And all of that is available. If you look, there is a purchase book button down below. And we actually have signed copies available, which is really, really special. So I'm going to stop rambling. I'm going to pass it off to Stephanie, and I will see y'all at the end of the event. Bye.
Yay!
Hi.
Hello, it's so good to see you. And
I know.
I feel like it's been, like 3 years since we've done an event?
A long time. Way too. But I was thinking fondly back on the last event we did, which was Brookline Book Fest. I don't remember which book in your series it was for, but I have a delightful photo in which we were both wearing giant statement rings, and I made us stop and hold them up for a photo op so everyone could take pictures of our delightful statement rings. And I almost wore a giant statement ring for this, but I felt like there was enough bling on my top anyway. So I was like, we're gonna keep it understated in my burgundy bell sleeve embellished top.
I love the top, and I saw in your Instagram that you were wearing these fabulous little boots. Do you still have those on?
Absolutely not. Those heels are like 5 inches. There's no way I'm gonna wear those longer than I have to.
But I feel like they were so perfect, because I feel like the Grand Master would totally approve.
They actually are very they have a little subtle galaxy. I'll have to post a better picture of them on Instagram, because they are literally a galaxy print. And I buy clothes aspirationally, thinking someday I'm going to go on tour with a book. And so they were definitely, I bought them with Gamora and Nebula in mind. So I had to wear them, even if it was just on Instagram for 10 minutes. And then I about fell on my butt about 5 times just in the walk from my apartment to my courtyard.
Well, they look fabulous in the picture, and I believe someday you'll get to wear them. And
until then, I have to practice walking in them. Gosh.
Yeah, I do. Wow, I have some 4 or 5 inch heels, and I've definitely injured myself, but I keep going at it because they're fun.
They're fun and they look so good, and mostly I'm just trying to acclimate myself to wearing clothes that aren't sweatpants after a year and a half of styling myself primarily in stretchy materials. So I'm trying to remember how to dress again.
Yes, that is it. Well, but you're always so good at it. I love watching your Instagram for fashion.
Thank you.
I can't wait until that happens again. And as much as I would love to keep talking about fashion, I'm really excited to talk about.
Oh, right. We should talk about books.
Gamora and
look, I noticed you've done the smart thing where you've mirrored your screen so everything's facing the right direction, where all of my books are backwards. So thank you for being a good example.
I don't even know that I did that. I'm I don't know.
You're doing great.
But all right, so I'm super excited to talk about this book, and Constance already gave a fabulous pitch, but I would love to know, what is your unofficial pitch? How do you describe it? How do you see this book?
So it's the first thing I kind of tell people generally is it's a space Western. In the grand tradition of many of my favorites like Firefly and Dune and Mad Max Fury Road, and it's set on a planet that is pretty directly inspired by the American West, and more directly by the idea of who did we have to exploit and what did we have to steal and kill and destroy in order to create this sort of myth of the cowboy and the Western and manifest destiny and things like that. So I came into this book, I came into my pitch with Marvel saying I want to write a True Grit, I want to write Firefly, I want to write Mad Max, but also I want to write about environmentalism, and I want to write about resources and clean energy and exploitation of labor. And they're like, great, this definitely sounds like a fun science fiction Marvel adventure novel. So it's set on this planet that has been strip mined into just basically down to the bones. And it has there's a renewable clean energy source that is found in the planet, and the people who inhabit the planet have been forced by this corporation to essentially kill their home world to survive, and they've been forced into these adventures that they sort of are paid so little they can't get out of, and they're stuck in. And Gamora arrives on this planet with an assignment from an unknown benefactor to retrieve the heart of the planet. So first she has to figure out what that means, and then she has to do it. And she ends up falling in with a group of women miners, women who are miners, I should say. The caveat is not that they are women. Women who are miners on the planet who are advocating for change and better working conditions, and also advocating to save their home before it's too late. And then hot on her heels, of course, is Nebula, because Nebula is always hot on her heels, and she is determined to do this thing before Gamora can do this thing, so she can go back to Thanos and look, I did the thing. I should be better than your 3rd round draft pick. And she instead aligns herself with this kind of nefarious religious organization called the Universal Church of Truth that is exploiting the vulnerabilities of the miners on this planet. So they're both chasing the same thing. Their paths, of course, end up intersecting. And once they do, they start to realize that they are pawns in a much larger game, and that perhaps this rivalry and this constant pitting themselves against each other that they've been raised with their whole lives is maybe an artifice that has been put in place to keep them from teaming up, because if they team up, they would be more powerful than Thanos. I don't know how to end that without it sounding really cheesy.
No, I'm that is the best line, because there's I think that's one of the things that's so gripping about Gamora and Nebula is knowing that if they could just get past the massive.
So that's one of the things I love most about them, and that I really used as sort of a touchstone and a cornerstone for creating this book. It takes place before most people are familiar with them. So it's before Guardians of the Galaxy, before Infinity War and Endgame. And in those portrayals, we see them at a place in their lives where they have recognized that they grew up in this incredibly abusive environment. They grew up gaslit and manipulated and traumatized by this person they thought they could trust and that they thought as a father figure. And they're trying to fight back against that. And so you see them sort of like trying to overcome the trauma of their youth and trying to trust each other and trying to trust other people and trust themselves and trust their own sense of self. And in this book, because we're earlier in their process, they're sort of out on their own for the first time. They're starting to develop a sense of themselves without Thanos' influence for the first time. And they're starting to recognize this trauma and abuse that they grew up with for the first time. So it's kind of working backwards from where you see them in the movies. But I totally agree that like that almost trusting each other every time is such a gut punch. You're like, guys, you'd be so great together.
Just let it go. Okay.
I know, friends. You both need a friend so bad.
I know.
Especially poor Nebula. I'm like, somebody be your friend.
I know. I just always feel
heart.
I feel like you see more of her emotions. Like she's just so like, just love me.
I know.
So I have a question. Okay, you sort of touched on this, but I'm so curious because it's Marvel, and I'm wondering like how this story and this book came to be about. And you kind of talked about like this is your pitch for them, but did you also were they the ones who came to you and were like, write a Gamora Nebula book, or did you come to them on top of your like environmental space western and like I want to write about these two badass sisters? So like, how did this come about?
A combination. Sidebar. So my sweet mother, who is so excited that she has now been mentioned in 2 events I've done, I'm sure. My sweet mother has no context for anything Marvel, but she has worked so hard to like learn who these characters are and have some sort of like intelligent conversation with me about them. And so in the first book in Loki, there's a character named Amor the Enchantress. And my mother was so like, she worked so hard. She's like, we got Loki, we have Thor, we have Amora. And then her brain about broke when I was like, my next book's about Gamora. And she's like, from the first book. And I was like, no, it's a different character's name, right? Like, I'm so sorry. I didn't name them. Please blame Stan Lee. Anyways, but going back to your question, so how it came about. So I got hired to write this series, and the pitch I got hired for was sort of 3 young adult novels that were about anti-heroes in the Marvel universe as teens. The first one would be Loki, and then the other 2 were TBD. And we sort of agreed we were going to see what characters were kind of popping with fans, or if anything was having a moment, or if there was anything that like really spoke to me, or anyone that really spoke to me. And so after Loki, I think it was right when Endgame came out, one of the big Avengers ones, and people had really responded to the Nebula and Gamora arcs, and so we started talking a little more seriously about them as the characters. And pre-pandemic, I flew out to California and had a meeting with a room full of very smart walking encyclopedias who all know every comic book by heart. And I sort of got my mood board in, and I was like, okay, it's about mining, it's Lonesome Dove, it's Mad Max, it's Hades Town, it's the West. Enjoy. And they came back with, okay, we love that. Have you thought about, you talked about wanting to talk about religion. Have you thought about bringing in the Universal Church of Truth? And I was like, no, I don't know what that is. And they're like, here, we're going to send you a bunch of comic books. And then they were like, have you talked about we were talking about like how much we wanted Thanos in the book. And one of the development executive we talked to was like, have you read this one comic about Thanos where it talks about his childhood and his youth and his relationship in particular with the like personification of death? And it's like, oh my gosh, how have I not read that? That's so my jam. And so they kind of came back with with canonical references for me. And so I brought my sort of vision, and then they responded with, here's a ton of Marvel Easter eggs you can put in. Here's a bunch of existing references you can draft off of. Here's existing storylines you might want to look at. And it all kind of went from there. It was a really cool collaborative process that I didn't expect to have going into working with Marvel, to be honest.
Wow. I mean, that sounds fascinating, because for me, I know the movies, and I admittedly know nothing about the comics. So the church was not something that I was familiar with. And, so it's really cool hearing like, oh my gosh, this is taken from this and this and this. And I love how you combined all of these things. I read an interview and I was trying to see, I didn't write down where the interview was. And I think it said that you had the most fun writing this book. So what was so fun about it, and what element of the story excited you the most?
I had so much fun writing this book. And I think part of it was so with Loki, which was the first one I did for Marvel, I hardcore psyched myself out in terms of both Loki as a character has such an enormous history within Marvel. And then outside of Marvel, you have literally like 10,000 years of mythology. And the Loki stands are really intense. And so I hardcore psyched myself out, and I actually read too much with Loki. And I read so many things about Loki that I became so obsessed with, like, okay, I have to make my version of Loki everybody's version of Loki. And by the time you try to be Neil Gaiman's Loki and the poetic A's Loki and Jack Kirby's Loki and Tom Hiddleston's Loki, there's no room to be Mackenzi Lee's Loki. And so I ended up kind of over-researching Loki, hardcore psyching myself out, and then having to step back from a lot of the research to be like, okay, just write your book. This is why they hired you. This is why they brought you. And so going into Nebula and Gamora, I felt so much less pressure because the characters don't have the sort of rabid fan base that Loki does. But they still have this incredible canon history to draw from. And also, I think the strong start with this strong collaboration with Marvel, knowing we were on the same page from the start. Loki took a little bit more trial and error, but knowing we were on the same page, and then getting to work with so many of these references and these things that I love was really awesome. And honestly, this is the first sci-fi I've written. I've usually done historical before this, and even Loki has like really strong historical elements. He's in 19th century Victorian London for a lot of it. This is the first book I've ever written where I didn't have to like pause and research 18th century cutlery for 4 hours. And man, that was liberating. Like, I kind of love not doing historical research. And I would run into something, I'd be like, I can just make stuff up. Like, this is great. And so part of it was that, like, part of it was world building from scratch, which I've never really done before. Also, I've never been an outliner in terms of writing. I always said I kind of write like driving in the dark, where you can only see as far as your headlights, but you have to keep driving in order to see further. And I sort of was married to that idea for a long time. And then working for Marvel, because you have to turn in these pretty extensive outlines beforehand, kind of has forced me to be an outliner. And I'm furious that it works and it's so effective. And so I had this like great outline for this book, and I worked with my editor on it for like a couple of months before I ever started writing. And it made it so much easier. And I'm so angry that outlines work, because I have to outline all my books. But there was something just like so fun and liberating to having done that work ahead of time, that I really I wrote this book in 30 days, kind of unintentionally, because I was just having fun. And I would just sit down and write, and I would just keep going. And I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I kept being like, okay, something's going to go wrong. This is too easy. You're going to realize you like missed a plot point, or something doesn't work in the mechanics of the story, or you're going to turn it in and they're going to be like, actually, we did want you to write about Amor the Enchantress, who's what's the book about Gamora. And it never happened. It was fun from start to finish, which I've never had with a book. There's always a period of intense anxiety and angst and just like lying face down on my rug in despair. And I somehow didn't have it with this book.
That's like the most inspiring story.
No, I'm never gonna be able to duplicate it. I've just accepted like this was a fluke. This was a one-time thing. Never gonna be this easy again.
But you know what? It just, like you never know, but it sounds like, and you can tell writing it that it was fun. I mean, from that opening with the game master, like fun, like just so like you can tell that you were in your element as you wrote this. So I'm going to like jump ahead to a question, because you kind of already talked about this a little bit, and because I'm really curious.
Okay.
I don't want to be spoilery, but the ending, I'll just say the ending is like fabulous. So did you always know how it was going to end? Because I know like I'll outline and sometimes change things, or like, did you arrive to parts of that ending as you wrote, or was it like, this is the like, you know, this is your endpoint the whole time. Like, I'd love to know how you decided to get there without being spoilery for everyone else.
Yeah, I know. Like, how do I talk about this without being spoilery? I almost worked backward from the end. I sort of came from this meeting in California with everybody, and I had all these sort of free-floating plot ideas and these different comics and inspirations. And I don't remember exactly the context, but I just remember texting my editor and saying, I think I have the ending. Can I send you just like the last, it wasn't a scene, but it was like a write-up of like what I want the last kind of moments of this book to be. And she was like, yes, absolutely. And I'm really lucky to have a fantastic editor that I have that relationship with, because I've not always had editors like that, and some are more collaborative than others. And I love having, I work with Emily Julin at Marvel, and she's a dream, and I love her, and love that I can text her at 11:30 at night and be like, I'm going to send you this weird half-written, unformatted version of the end scene of a book you haven't read. And she responded to it as strongly as I had when I had, like, it was one of those things where I had the idea and I was like, this is how it has to end. This is how it has to be. This sort of feels like a natural culmination for the book. I'm trying so hard. I'm like, how do I?
That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, and this is, sorry, everyone. I'm just like, reading it, I was like, I have to ask this question. But also I do think it's fascinating to know, like, if someone is writing to get to that end because they know what happens, or if it's a surprise, you know, to an author as they reach that point.
Yeah. I've heard writers say before, I always feel like everyone has like a much more coherent, consistent process than I do. And so I heard authors say, like, I always have to know how the story ends before I start. And I'm like, it's not me. This is the first time I feel like I've ever known how my book ended and had such a clear point that I was driving towards. I will, and I don't think this is a spoiler. I did think about too, one of the things, and maybe it's a spoiler, one of the things people responded to so strongly in Loki that I didn't expect was sort of like emotional gut punch at the end. And I am inclined to write happy endings, especially because in the past I've written a lot about queer characters in history, and so I want to give them unambiguous, unapologetic happy endings, because I think we need more queer people, especially in history, that get those endings. And so writing these kind of old switcheroo endings was new and different for me, and seeing how strongly people responded to the Loki ending, I was like, oh, I want to do that again. I want to make people that angry again.
it's kind of like fun. It is.
It's just, I think it's cool to create something and have people respond with such real emotion to it. And I mean, like, that's the mark of good fiction, and not to say that, I mean, I think they're great, but not to use myself as an example. But like, when I really like a TV show or a movie or a book, it's the real emotion that is solicited from me in response to it that really, like, is the marker of quality for me. Like, I just read People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry, and I have never felt more single than when I was reading that book. Like, I was so actively, like, wanting to be in love with someone because of how romantic that book is. I was like, this is how you know it's a good one, is when I'm feeling those feelings in my real life for these fictional characters.
Yes, I love that, and I agree. I think one of the things about, like, Gamora and Nebula that makes them so interesting is I think they're like fascinating characters on their own, but when they come together, the like interplay of the two of them, it's like, it just enhances everything. And so I'm really curious how you approached writing them, and if you have a favorite.
Okay, first of all, I'm going to answer the second part of your question first, which is no, I do not have a favorite, and I cannot pick a favorite, because if I pick a favorite, I am no better than Thanos.
Good, very valid.
No, I really love them both, though, and I kind of ended up loving whichever one I was writing their point of view at the time was my favorite. Like, they're both so interesting and have so much. It's interesting too, because they come from the same place. They are kind of the only two people who know what the other is going through in terms of so many very specific things. Like, they're the last of their kind. They're raised by this, like, adopted father, madman, psycho abuser. And they have one person in the galaxy who can understand what they're going through, and they've been cut off, and that person's right there standing in front of them, but they've been cut off emotionally from them by other forces and by outside influences. And it's so sad because it's one of those things where you just want to be like, just talk to each other. Like, you feel so alone in the galaxy right now, and the person who could understand you is standing right in front of you, and you have been gaslit into thinking that you cannot trust them, and that they are always out to get you, and they are always going to stab you in the back, and that any vulnerability you show to anyone, but especially this person, is going to be used and weaponized against you. And it's really like, that's the great tragedy of them, is they could be each other's greatest allies, but they've been taught that the other person will always turn on them, and that they can't trust each other. And you see them kind of slowly unlearning this in the films and in some of the later comics, but at this point in their story, they're still just barely starting to recognize the artifice of this mistrust. I lost your question because I was just talking about how sad they make me.
No, I think it was just like pretty much how you approached writing them. Like,
oh yeah, how I approached it.
Yeah,
I took sort of the iterations that people are most familiar with, which is the films, because if you look back in the comics, Gamora and Nebula, as they first appeared, are totally unrecognizable from who most people know them as now. They're not affiliated with the Guardians of the Galaxy, or the Guardians of the Galaxy is a different team. Gamora is on like a different intergalactic space team at one point that is working against the Universal Church of Truth and trying to take down Adam Warlock, and it's a whole thing. So I was very much drafting on the version of them that I knew most people would be familiar with, and the version of their relationship that I knew most people would be familiar with and would be bringing to the table. And then I just kind of worked backwards, and I took these breadcrumbs we see in the movies where they'll kind of hint at something, and things have happened between them that have formed this relationship and made it as fragile as it is. And I just kind of took those things and then worked backward and traced the logic and the events backwards. There's also, sorry. I just thought of one more thing. So that was sort of the like work backwards thing. And then the moment that became another kind of cornerstone of the book for me actually appears in one of the comics. And I need to, before I do any more interviews, I need to actually go look up which comic it's in so I can give this writer and artist proper credit. But there is an instance in the comics that also became, somebody passed it on to me from that Marvel meeting. And as soon as I found it, I was like, oh my gosh, this has to be a thing. And I couldn't put it in the books that already exist in the comics. That became sort of the thing that has happened right before the book. So there's a scene in one of the comics where Nebula and Gamora and Thanos are on this planet. They're on a mission together doing, I can't remember what they're doing, doesn't matter. And Nebula, in this sort of misguided attempt to prove herself and be like, look, I can also be the best, kind of races into this fight before they're ready and ends up falling into a trap, and she gets stuck in this energy net. And Thanos and Gamora come to save her, and they fight their way through, and they get to her. And she's like, hey, can you like get me out of this energy net, please? And they leave her there. And Gamora leaves her with a knife, and she ends up cutting off her own arm to survive. And I was like, that is so hardcore. And that's also just, oh my God, like trauma. And that sort of I was going to say the hardcoreness, but that doesn't seem to do it justice. Like the brutality of that felt so indicative of their relationship, how extreme their relationship is, and how extreme and literal this like sibling rivalry and fight to survive is in their lives. And so that moment for me too kind of became, those were sort of the bookends of writing, was this thing that had just happened with Nebula in the book. She's just lost her arm. She's recovering from that. Neither of them have been cybernetically enhanced yet. So she's still sort of like learning to live with a prosthetic for the first time. And then the other sort of bookend was where we see them in Guardians of the Galaxy. Sorry, I talked for way too long about that one. I
love the answer because I'm just like, oh, that's the knife in the boot.
Yeah, the knife in the boot.
I love it. And that's why it's so easy to talk to, because it's like, okay, I have like all these questions, but I know I don't have to ask them all, because it's like those are fabulous answers. Because I was curious, like,
go and go.
How much the films informed you, and how many times did you watch the films?
I've watched the films a bunch. I've also watched like there's YouTube compilations of like the best of Gamora and Nebula, and I've watched those more than I think I've actually watched the films. And I mean, they had to, so Marvel is weird in that their press side and their studio side are totally separate. And I think the press side, because they were like the originals, they were the comics, they're where all this comes from, they have a little bit of like maybe a slight complex where they're like, no, we are the original and best. And often they don't even want to acknowledge that the movies on the studio side exist, when really like the background that most people are coming to these books with realistically is because they know these characters from the movie. And with Loki, it was trickier to navigate that. With Gamora and Nebula, it like I said earlier, the versions of these characters that most people know exist because of James Gunn and Jen Perlman and their script and Guardians of the Galaxy. And so they kind of were forced to let me acknowledge that the movies exist, which was harder than you would think. So they draft upon the existing relationships in the movie, but hopefully exist beyond that, and exist especially. I know I've talked a lot about comic books, but I hope they'll work for people who haven't read comics too. And there's a lot of little references and sort of breadcrumbs you can pick up if you are a comic fan. And I had an interview I did earlier today where the interviewer came in and immediately was like, "You wrote about the Universal Church of Truth." And I was like, "I did." And she's like, "That's a deep cut." And I'm like, "It is." So you can be that person, or you can come in and just be like, "I know Gamora and Nebula. Here's a weird, creepy religion. Let's talk about that." And so it can work for everyone. You said you're not a comics reader. I wasn't a comics reader for a long time. And I remember as a kid desperately wanting to be a comics reader. I was a very secret nerd because I was a nerd before it was mainstream and cool to be a nerd. And before all of you could like walk through the mall and see Star Wars and Marvel stuff proudly on display in mainstream stores. And so I was very secretive about my nerdiness. And I didn't know how to read comics. And I remember going to the comic book store and it was like dimly lit and unair conditioned, and everyone else in there was like a 40-year-old man with a ponytail. And I was like, "I don't want to talk to you." And then I would see these racks of comic books and I'd pick one up and be like, "I don't know who these people are. I don't know how to learn who these characters are." We're clearly in the middle of a story, because I realized now I was picking up middle issues, like the middles of a run. And I had no idea. And I was like, "I don't know how to read these. And everything about this place is telling me it is not for me." And so I just didn't read comics when I was a kid. And then because of the films, and because the films sort of established this common language for a lot of people and this foundational understanding of these characters, I was able to start reading comics more. And I think that's been such a great thing that Marvel has done. Not to like, I promise nobody's paying me. They are paying me to say this. They're literally paying me. They're not paying me to say this specifically, which is that one of the coolest things about Marvel is how they have taken these stories and expanded them across so many platforms, so that however you consume media and whatever stories work for you, however stories work best for you, whether it's in books, in comics, in movies, in video games, in amusement parks, like there is now something for everyone, and you can interact with these stories and these characters across platforms. And it's so exciting and so cool, and has made this world so accessible to so many people. And I find that just sincerely thrilling and sincerely such a fun thing to be a part of.
I love that.
I tried on comics.
No, I think it's great, because even though I wasn't a comic book person, like I've always been like a fantasy girl. And like as the kid, like you only had these like big like adult male fantasies is what I would always call them, because it was like those were the old books and they were big and they didn't feel accessible to me. So like I think accessibility in stories is just so important, because you have people who love all kinds, but not every story is the right fit for everyone. So I agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's wonderful. And it also brings up another question that I've really been wanting to talk to you about. So the Game Master.
Okay. The Grandmaster, not to correct you, but the Grandmaster. What? Yes.
What is
the Grandmaster.
Grandmaster.
That's okay. He plays games. The Grandmaster plays games.
So
I just know that the nerds would be in the comments.
Is he in the comments? And how did
he is? Yeah.
Like, his role, because he was just so fun.
So yeah, he's another one he's in the comics and has a much larger role in the comics and a much sort of richer backstory than the little glimpse we get of him in Thor Ragnarok. I think is the only film that he appears in. And so he was brought to me as a character by one of the Marvel people. And And when we were first talking about this book as a sort of set on this space Western planet, somebody mentioned, I don't remember who it was in the room, somebody was like, what if it's a competition? And what if you like take this rivalry between them and make it literal in that they're literally in competition against each other for something? And I was like, I love that. And then it naturally kind of came around to the Grandmaster, because he's the arbiter of all games in the Marvel universe, and that's sort of his role, is that he loves to mess with people and manipulate people and create amusement at the cost of other people's lives often. But he's a funny character, and he's a fun character, and he's got sort of weird oddball screwball energy to him. And he appears primarily in the book through these like security footage transcripts that kind of break up the narrative between Nebula and Gamora. And when I wrote those, I put in a lot of ridiculous jokes and kept waiting. I was like, somebody's going to edit these out. Like, nobody's going to let me say the Grandmaster is shredded. And nobody ever took them out. So it's just sort of one of those things where I was like, how much can I get away with? And nobody ever stopped me. So there's some fun jokes in there that I can't believe ended up in the final book.
It was so perfect, and it was so fun, like, because I heard Jeff Goldblum's voice, like.
Yeah. It's impossible not to. I hear Jeff Goldblum's voice just like on a daily basis.
Which is
reading like subway signs, and I hear Jeff Goldblum's voice. So.
You know, there are worse people who can narrate your life.
It's true. I would love him as an internal monologue.
Yeah.
Voiceover.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. But the jokes, like the lines were just, they were fantastic. I love them. Okay.
Thank you.
I feel like I'm looking at the time and I still have a couple more questions. So everyone, in a few minutes, we are going to go to the questions that you all have. So if you haven't asked a question, you want to ask them, make sure to ask a question. Also, I'm just going to remind everyone that you can purchase Gamora and Nebula and any of other Mackenzi books, the little green button. So, okay. All right. I'm not going to get up to all my questions because I want to make sure we get to everyone else's. So you already said there's 3 books in this series. Do you know what the next book is going to be? And is there anything you can tell us about it?
I do know what the next book is going to be, and if I tell you anything about it, you will see a little red dot appear on my forehead from the Marvel sniper that is sitting across the room from me. Yeah, I can't say. I did an interview earlier in pre-promo for this book, and they asked me the same question, and my publicist was on the phone with me, sort of lurking in the background on mute, and I didn't say who the character was, but I gave like a very, very, very subtle hint. And suddenly her voice comes in from nowhere and goes, yeah, you're going to need to leave that out of the interview. You can't say that. Like,
whoa.
So I'm on ice with that one. I wish I could tell you. And as you know, it's always weird to be promoting a book, because usually when you're promoting a book, like, I haven't read this book in a year. I haven't worked on this book in a year. It was done a long time ago. I haven't thought about this book in forever. And my brain is in a totally different corner of the Marvel universe right now. And so I've been like on high alert all day as I've been doing interviews, being like, don't say it, don't say it, don't say it. Like, don't accidentally say who it is.
Oh,
so
okay.
I can't tell you anything. We're so cold.
No more questions, but I will be stalking your Instagram to find out what it is, because now I'm super duper curious. Okay. So, all right, since my time's almost up, before we go to questions, I'm just going to do a quick lightning round. And so the lightning round is a Marvel this or that. Ant-Man suit or Iron Man suit?
Iron Man.
WandaVision or The Falcon and the Winter Soldier?
WandaVision. Can we just for a moment talk about WandaVision and I just listened to yesterday an interview with the sort of creator and the head writer. I think her name's Jack Schaefer, behind WandaVision, and I already was like, I was obsessed with that show. I love that show. I think it was such a brave, big swing for Marvel to be like, here's our first Disney Plus series. It's modeled on sitcoms. You're gonna have no idea what's going on for most of it. And she was talking about how they mapped every episode in the sitcoms and the emotional arc of every episode around the stages of grief. And I about had a meltdown as I started to like go back and think about that. It's like, oh my gosh, this show just got even better. Sorry. I lost my mind over WandaVision. I loved it. I hope they keep doing. I'm so excited for the Loki show. I hope they keep using their TV space to do these like kind of oddball, weird experimental things, because you see that kind of stuff pop up in the comics a lot, and there's a lot of like really weird kind of sidebar kooky adventures for lots of characters, and I want to see that more in the TV stuff.
I did not know that about the grief, but I also loved WandaVision.
I'm losing my mind.
Yeah, I felt like I didn't know what was happening at first, but it was so nice because I was like, I like this idea of being like, I trust Marvel, I trust this storytelling. So even though I'm like, what am I watching? Because I watched it I couldn't binge it.
I didn't. I was kind of smart and knew that because I think I didn't have time to watch the first week, and so I knew from people's reactions that it was weird and didn't make sense. And I was like, I'm gonna wait, and so I waited and watched it all in one shot right before the finale. And I think I actually enjoyed it more that way because I felt less disoriented the whole time because I could just go into the next episode. But yeah, I'm a big fan of WandaVision, and it's one of those shows that the further I get from it, like the longer between watching it, it just gets better and better the more I think about it and the more I dwell on it. And I'm just, I love that show. So yeah, sorry, that was my diatribe.
No, it was great because it was such brilliant storytelling and so clever and creative. So if you all haven't seen it, you should totally watch it after reading Gamora and Nebula, Sisters in Arms. Okay, next question. Peter Quill's Walkman or Thor's Hammer, and bonus points if you can pronounce the name of Thor's Hammer because I can't.
Oh, do you mean Mjolnir?
Is that
Thor's Hammer, Mjolnir? Oh, my mom gets to cameo twice in this conversation. We once she watched the first, I think, 30 minutes of Ragnarok with me one time before Loki came out in an attempt to get context for the characters in the books. Bless my mother. She read both these books, has, I don't think, any idea what's going on in either of them, but is so like lovely and supportive of them. But we were watching Ragnarok, and there's the part with Loki disguised as Odin, and Thor's like holding out his hand to call his hammer. And I went, Mjolnir. And she just started like hysterically laughing at me. I was like, what? And she's like, what did you just say? And I was like, Mjolnir. And then she just giggled harder. I'm like, it's Mjolnir. That's his hammer. She goes, no, it's not. And she goes, you're making that up. You're trying to make fun of me. I was like, I'm not. That's the actual name. So yeah, Mjolnir. I don't know. I think I would pick Mjolnir. Those are two artifacts I would not necessarily put in direct competition with each other. But Mjolnir, if only just so that I could like occasionally reach out and it would slide in my hand and it would be like validation. Still worthy.
And it would look very cool on a bookshelf.
That's a good point too.
Yeah.
I'm all about symbolism and things done for aesthetic effect. So yeah, can go right next to my Loki horns.
All right, this is a hard one and kind of unfair because it still stays in the world of Disney but goes outside the realm of Marvel. Baby Groot or Baby Yoda?
Oh no. Oh, I have another wholesome story about my mother. I'm so sorry. I promise this event is not just about my mom. My sweet mother, who is a 60-something-year-old Mormon woman from Utah, who has been trying her damnedest over the past couple of years to be more inclusive and be more thoughtful and diversify her viewpoint. And it has been so sweet and so fun to watch. And fun is maybe the wrong word. It's been so gratifying to watch. So I think we see a lot of like, she's never been a super diehard conservative, but we see a lot of discourse about like, if you have conservative family members, you need to cut them out of your life. It's like, also, we should give people a chance to learn and grow because sometimes they surprise you and they really want to be better and work harder and be kinder. And so my sweet mother, when was watching The Mandalorian, because my sister loves it, and my favorite text I've ever gotten from her was to both my sister and I, and it just said, "Our Grogu's, what is it? Is it Grogu?"
Grogu.
Yeah, because I always call him Grogu because we also joked his name is Miracle Grogu to help her remember what his name was. But so she texted us, "Is our Grogu's pronouns he, she, or they?" Like, mother.
Oh, that is really
She wanted to make sure she was using the right pronouns for Baby Yoda. Nothing has ever warmed my heart more than that. for that reason alone, I think I have to pick Baby Yoda.
That is very valid. Oh my gosh, I just love your mom. She sounds amazing.
She's such a nutcase. I love her. I did an Instagram live on Marvel yesterday, and she watched it, and she was going through the comments on Instagram live on Marvel, and I was like, "Why are you doing this?" She's like, "Yeah, I learned pretty quick not to do that." And I told a story about her on that live too, and she was so tickled that she made a cameo. And then someone in the comments said, "We want a sneak peek of MOM." And my mom got very flattered, thinking like, "Oh, they want to know more about me." No, they were talking about the new Doctor Strange movie, the Multiverse of Madness, using the acronym MOM. I don't pee in my pants when she told me this. I was like, bless you, but no one on the Marvel Instagram page is asking for a sneak peek of your life.
Oh, I love it.
She's pretty fun. She's a character.
Sounds great. Okay. So, speaking of favorite topics, because it sounds like your mom's one of them, we have a question from Manu in Argentina. What are some of your favorite topics to write about? Sending lots of love from Argentina.
Hi, Argentina. I love Argentina. I got to go there a couple of years ago and do the Buenos Aires Book Fair, and it was so cool. And that was the first time I'd ever done an international event. And like the fact that I was like, here are people who are reading my books in a language I don't speak, and like we don't have a common language, but we have these stories in common. And it was just like, it blew my mind. It was so cool. And everyone in Argentina was legitimately like the nicest, and they all brought me alfajores because they knew I loved them, and fan art. And I had this lovely like bag of just like presents from people in Argentina. I loved my time in Argentina. It was so much fun. So hello, Argentina. I love you guys very much.
Oh, did you see the comment?
We did. Oh, we met there. Oh my gosh. Thank you for coming back for more. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad. That was like one of the most magical days ever at the book fair there. So thank you for such a lovely time there. I forgot the question. Things I like to write about, topics I like to write about.
What are some of your favorite topics to write about?
Some of my favorite topics to write about. I like writing about complicated women is one thing. And I like writing about, even kind of before I got this job with this series, I like writing about anti-heroes, and I like writing about unlikable characters. And I think that's because to me, I think if I were a protagonist of a novel, I would always be labeled as an unlikable main character, an unlikable female lead. And I think we all kind of feel that way. And characters like Captain America are really fun when they're sort of like the lawful good, and you can always rely on them. And at some point they're going to have to make a choice, and you know they're going to make the right choice, and it's going to be hard, but they're going to do it anyway. Whereas with anti-heroes, you don't kind of know what choice they're going to make. And that unpredictability is fun, but also I think really makes a lot of us feel validated, because I always see those big sort of world-saving choices, and I'm like, oh, I don't know if I would be altruistic enough to like save a planet instead of saving the people I love the most. And so I do sincerely, I think of like Monty from Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue as very much being an anti-hero. And Felicity kind of, though she just gets called an unlikable character because she's a woman. But I love writing about, those kind of characters who either are anti-heroes or think they're unlovable for some reason. I love writing about interesting things in history that people don't know about, because history is so fascinating. And I hate that most people's primary interaction with the past has been through like incredibly boring high school classes. And so I love writing about real things, and I love how weird and gross and strange history is. And I love getting to sort of share those things with people who don't know about them. Like in Loki, because he's in Victorian London for a lot of it, one of the main sort of genesis points for that book was the London Necropolis rail, which was a real thing. And so in the 19th century, London was so gross and dirty and so full of cholera, and so many people were dying that they literally ran out of spaces to bury bodies. And there were like bodies piled up on the street, and the city was like, we got to do something about this. And so they built a cemetery outside of the city. But they're like, how do we get bodies there? So they built a train just to carry the dead bodies to the city that was 45 minutes outside of London. So you had a train of dead people going between London and Brookwood which I'm like, how creepy and weird and Victorian and Gothic is that? And how has nobody put that in a book? So I love writing about those sort of niche, weird things in history that feel fantastical but are true. That was a long answer.
That goes well into one of the next questions, which is what made you write about the 18th century, and what was your research process?
Oh, for Gentleman's Guide, and I had a weird moment where I was like, Nebula is not set in the 18th century. So Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue, for people who don't know, is a historical fiction book I wrote that's set in the 18th century Europe, and it's sort of focused around this idea of the Grand Tour, which was the 18th century rich white man's equivalent of a gap year. And you would spend a couple of years living abroad in Europe in all these fancy capitals, and it was meant to sort of further your cultural education, and you would learn a language and buy art and things like that. But you were also just kind of like killing time until your father died and you could take over the estate. And you were also kind of meant to sow your wild oats and kind of get that youthful hedonism out of your system before you came back to England. And so I became interested in the Grand Tour actually right after taking kind of a gap year of my own. And I lived in the UK for a while and had done a ton of traveling on a very different budget than they have in Gentleman's Guide around Europe. And then came back and was a teaching assistant for a humanities course at the university I was going to that was all sort of focalized around this idea of if you were a young person taking your Grand Tour in the 1700s, where would you go? And so we'd go to Paris, and then we'd do kind of a deep dive into the art and architecture and culture in Paris. And it was a really smart way to structure this intro to humanities course. And I didn't know anything about the Grand Tour. I'd never heard of it. And now I had just kind of come off doing one of my own, and I was really buying into all that like Pinterest aphorisms about like the transformative power of travel on young people. And so I love finding those moments in history that sort of reaffirm that the world changes, but people really don't change. And the fact that even in the 18th century, they were traveling to find themselves and traveling to broaden their cultural horizons as a young person. I had this sort of like nice touchstone moment. And also it was just one of those things I was so interested in it. I wasn't writing fiction at the time, but I kind of shuffled it away and was just like, someday if I ever have an opportunity to write an adventure novel, this would be a great setting for it. So yeah, that's how I first became aware of it. What was the other part of the question?
And what was your researching process?
Oh God, enormous. Spanned over the course of years. I was researching before I knew I was researching. Like I was researching when I was TAing this class, I was researching in everything I ever read. Like it's weird to talk about historical research because there's lots you do that's specifically like, okay, I'm trying to find details for the book. I have to spend 4 hours Googling 18th century underwear and it's boring. And then you cut that scene from the book and it's a total waste of time. But then there's also, because I'm just a person who is interested in history, there's all this stuff I pick up just from reading things and listening to podcasts and watching films that I don't think about needing to use. Like I don't think of it as research. It's stuff I'm interested in, and it ends up getting sort of dropped into books or influencing books indirectly later on.
I think that's a great answer. And it kind of goes into like the next question, which is what is your writing process like? And I really like the second part of this question too, which I feel like, especially for this year, how are you able to find motivation and time to write?
Oh boy, my writing process is kind of an unpredictable nightmare. I have yet to write 2 books in the same way. Sorry, I thought Mysterious Galaxy was telling us off in the comments that we're going too long, but I'm going to keep talking. My writing process is always all over the place, and it's been kind of dictated. And I don't know if you've experienced this too, by having books under contract and having deadlines. And sometimes when you're a professional writer and doing this full time for money, you don't have the luxury of needing a writing process. And sometimes you don't have months to outline things. You don't have months to sit with an idea and to lovingly nurse it. You just have to write it, and you have to get something turned in on time. So the stakes definitely change when there's like your paycheck is attached to it. And now that this is something I do full time for my living, it has definitely changed my writing process. And it sounds very cynical. I wish I could maintain this sort of romantic illusion about writing as this creative pursuit that fills my soul, but sometimes it's literally just like, I need this check. Like, I got to pay my rent next month. My writing process will be whatever it needs to be so that I can pay my rent. And in terms of finding motivation, like, I mean, the smoking gun of bills is good motivation sometimes. But also I do think that if you really like, I always come back to, I love telling stories. And for me, I can't not do that. And it doesn't always happen in the form of novels. And sometimes my sort of creative well for writing novels feels all dried up. What I want to do is tell stories in other formats. And so sometimes I take breaks and I write in other mediums, and I write in other styles and formats and things like that. And I know that most of that stuff I write is never going to be read by anybody. It's never going to be seen by anybody. But that's not the point. The point is that we tell stories because that's what we love to do. And because stories create empathy and they connect us, and they make us more kind and thoughtful citizens of the world, and encourage us to think about life from other people's point of views. And so for me, it's the motivation comes because I don't know how to do anything else, and I don't want to do anything else. And that seems kind of, there we go. Here, I went from cynicism to romanticism, but in the end, like, that's what it comes back to for me, is my motivation is that I want to be a storyteller, and I want to do that forever in any medium I can. And I am so lucky that this is my job, and people are paying. I've tricked it all into paying me to do this. That was a little bit of a roundabout answer, but
I think it's a fabulous and perfect answer, and the perfect note to end this on, unless you have any final last words or things to say.
I was gonna see if I could get Queenie to make a cameo. Have a dog ice cream for her. If I open it, maybe she'll come, but no promises. Hey, Queenie!
I actually did have one that I forgot to ask. To ask. If you could say anything to Thanos, what would it be?
Oh, I can't say it. This is a PG show.
How about one of these for you?
Yeah, perfect. Just a black bar over my mouth. Wait, look, and we have hey, come here.
Oh,
this is my dog, who's been so. I have been doing interviews. Oh, I know, and I took that away from you. That was mean. I've been doing interviews for literally 7 hours today, and she has been a perfect angel baby.
Oh,
look at everybody. Look at him. Oh, look. Yeah, you're a good girl. Okay, she gets her dog ice cream now, and we can sign up.
That is so cute. Oh,
do you want me to hold this for you? Usually you take it and eat it independently, but
after a cute dog, I can't top a cute dog. But
that's why I saved her for the end. It's the grand finale.
Right. Well, oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Mackenzi and Stephanie.
Thank you for hosting us. Stephanie, thank you so much. You always have the best questions. You're such a good interviewer.
Thanks for letting me join. It was super fun. I'm excited for everyone to read and then be traumatized at the end like me.
Yeah. So if you wish to be traumatized in the best way possible, you can purchase any of Mackenzi's books down below. And also, too, on a final note, I know that upon pain of red dotted death, you cannot tell us what you are currently working on. But so that people can stay in the loop for both of you, where can they find you on social media and or newsletter and or whatever is the best way to stay up to date with what you've got going on?
I have a website, which is MackenzieLee.com. It's MackenziLee. There's no E in Mackenzie. You can also find me on Instagram at the Mackenzi Lee. There's also a phone number on my Instagram account that you can text me, and you'll sign up for like a little text alert occasionally whenever I have like a cute Queenie picture or something to say about my books or something to announce. I'll send you a little text. But also you can like text me, and it's really me, and I'll talk to you, and we can talk about Gamora and Nebula or Queenie or whatever you want to talk about. So text me. I should probably know that number off the top of my head. I hardly know my own phone number. I'm calling my Instagram. It's happening. You can text me at, oh God, Queenie slobbered on my phone and the screen's not responding. 617-812-9235. But also that's on my main Instagram page. So text me and we can talk. And then I can't tell you what Marvel I'm working on next. I have the 3rd book in the Gentleman's Guide series is out in November. It's called The Nobleman's Guide to Scandal and Shipwreck. It's so long overdue. And I am so appreciative of everyone sticking with me as I pried this book out of my soul over the past year of quarantine.
Oh, and Stephanie, where can people find you?
I am most often on Instagram, and my handle is Stephanie_Garber. And then I also have a website, StephanieGarberAuthor.com. And then I also have a Facebook page that I update. I don't know what it is, but I'm Stephanie Garber on there. So yeah, those you can find. And I do have a new book coming out. Once Upon a Broken Heart. Woo! Releases September 28th of this year. It's a story about fairy tales and kisses and bargains with fate. And I had a lot of fun with that book.
All of the good things.
I'll say I got this. I work at an indie bookstore 2 days a week. And I got this. It came in yesterday to the bookstore. And I grabbed it and asked our children's buyer, like, can I take this? And usually with ARC, she's very like, yeah, anyone takes it. Whoever's going to read it, take it. And I said, can I take this one? She goes, yes, but you have to bring it back. Oh my God, like she got so serious about it. Like, you can't have that one. I said, okay.
Oh, I love that. But if you want one to keep, I'm sure I can help you out with that one.
I know some people.
You've got an insider connection you can use. But, well, oh my gosh. Everyone, you now have all of the things so you can go stay up to date because there's so many great books coming from these authors, and highly encourage you to go follow them. And we will see you all next time. Thank you guys so very much for celebrating. And one more big round of applause for Gamora and Nebula. Yay!
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming and hanging out with us tonight.
Yay. Good night, everyone.